Hey guys, how are you doing? In today's video, I'm going to show you our 5-step approach to doing estimations, to answering estimation questions. Just before we start, I want to clarify something to you that people ask me all the time, so I just want to get this out of the way. And the question everyone asks me is, why is it that we call them estimations while everyone else calls them market sizing? And that's because not all estimation questions you get will be market sizing. Many of those are going to be to estimate anything else. And the reason for that is when you're in the consulting job, you're going to estimate a lot of stuff. And the least of those are going to be market sizing. Although market sizing estimations are going to be the ones that are most relevant to the project, the ones that are probably going to go in the slide deck that the client's going to get. In the everyday life, you're going to be doing other estimations, like how much work some initiative is going to take, how much time, how much money some initiative is going to take, or how much whatever resource something will take, or whatever result something will bring. And it could be saving time, saving money, saving work, anything. And it's not always going to be a market sizing. Consultants are doing estimations all the time, even to decide what part of the project they want to tackle when they don't have a lot of time or anything like that. So that's why they're going to give you other things to estimate, not only market size. And that's why I want you to practice not only market sizes. And the way I'm going to show you this is I will quickly go over the steps, and then I'm going to do a drill myself. I hope you try to do that drill before I do it so that you can get an even better understanding of the steps. And then on the third step, I will explain each step of our approach thoroughly with examples from this drill. So you're going to understand this a lot deeper if you try doing the drill before me rather than only watching it and then watching the steps and just trying to absorb everything passively. Okay? So first, before I start this, I want to tell you why I'm giving you a step-by-step process rather than a set of principles or a bunch of examples. So that's because it's easier to do everything right and not get lost if you're following a step-by-step. And it's also easier to show the interviewer that you're getting all the important drivers, that you're going to get to the answer, and that you can discuss each issue in depth if you're separating each one of the steps. I've coached candidates for over 2 years, and I've always started with estimations, and I have absolutely no doubt that doing clearly defined steps is the best way to do your estimations. And it's all spelled out to you here. So just follow these steps in practice, and you'll be ready for any estimation cases. Now let's go. Let me show you the 5 steps that I want you to follow. The first step is clarify the estimation scope. So just make sure that you know exactly what it is that you're trying to estimate. Second one, structure the problem. So what factors you're going to use and how you're going to use them. Don't put any numbers yet, just indicate what you're going to do. Third, choose your assumptions. So assign values to the variables that you just put together. And next, calculate, so actually get to an answer based on the values you got and the math structure you said you were going to use. And last, check your answer. So does it make sense? Compare it to something else to know whether it makes sense or not. Now here goes the drill. Case question is, your client is a private equity fund who has been faced with the decision of investing in a rapidly growing candy company called Jupiter. Jupiter's main bets for their growth over the next year is the quality of their bubblegum. Your team was assigned to help this client decide whether or not they should invest in Jupiter. After the first problem-solving meeting, you're individually assigned with quickly estimating the size of the bubblegum market in the US. How would you do that? Now, take your time, structure your answer, come up with your full answer, do all 5 steps, and only then watch my answer and the explanation on each step. Just before I start, I have a quick question that I want to ask, and that is, do I want to estimate only bubblegum as in candy, or chewing gum like nicotine gum or other functional gums too. And the interviewer is gonna tell me actually, that's okay, you can estimate only bubble gum as in candy. We don't, we're not looking at other gum markets at all. Okay, alright, so first thing I want to do is structure my problem, and the way I want to do this is bubblegum market in the US in dollars per year is number of pieces sold times the price per piece, and the number of pieces sold in a year is the number of consumers times the average yearly consumption per consumer, and the number of consumers is the total population times the penetration rate of bubblegums. Now I want to start assigning values to my assumptions, and I want to start with total population. I know that the total population in the US is 320 million approximately, and now to the penetration rate of bubblegum. So I believe that not that many people do not chew gum, even though teens and children chew more than adults. A lot of people chew gum. So I will go with 80%, although that might even be pessimistic. But that's my assumption here. And now to the average yearly consumption per consumer. So I chew around 5 pieces of gum per day on average, but I'd say I'm way above average. So I'm gonna go with frequent consumers consuming around 20 pieces per week, low frequency consumers consuming around 4 to 5 pieces per week, and low frequency consumers are probably more frequent. So 8 to 10 pieces per week on average is my assumption here. At 50 weeks per year, I'll go with 400 pieces per year on average per consumer. Now, to price per piece, so I believe premium brands are priced on average around 25 cents a piece, and I'm thinking about those, I'm thinking about single pieces, not little packs with several pieces inside. And low-cost brands are priced at around 5 cents a piece, I think. That's based on my experience. If we have any data on that, that would be really helpful. And I'm going to assume that they are sold at a 4-to-1 ratio. So I'd say that the average piece of gum costs 9 cents. Okay? Now, let me just do some quick calculations here to get to my answer. So 320 million times 80%, that should be close to 320. 80% of 300 is 240, 80% of 20 is 16. So I'll go with, so this is 256 million consumers times 400, that will be 250 times 400 will be 1,000, so 100,000, so that's 100,000 million, 100 billion. It's got to be close to 100 billion, but I can tell here, like I can see that 4 times 256, that's 2 to the 10th, so that's 1024, so that's gonna be 102.4 billion. I'll go with 102 billion, and this is 10% less than 102 billion. So can I round this? I'd ask the interviewer in this case, can I round this down a little bit to 9.2 billion and actually round up a little bit? And yeah, in this case the interviewer would say okay, because I'm rounding less than 1% in difference, so they'll say that's fine. And now, just before I say that this is my final number, let me check to see if this makes sense. So I know that each American spends around $30 per year on bubblegum based on this value. So that's 9 billion divided by 300 million, and that would be around $30 per American. And that's between 1 and 3 meals, depending on where you are and what kind of meal you're getting. But I probably spend the equivalent to 5 meals in gum per year. So this sounds reasonable given that I chew gum above average. Of course, maybe in the US people chew more gum than in Brazil. Maybe my experience is a bit skewed in a sense, but it should be in the ballpark. And if there's anything way off here, I believe it has to be in either price or average consumption per consumer. Those are my variables that I'm the least certain about and that could change the most. And now, as I said, we're going to go through each step of the process so that I can show you with examples what they mean. So first one is clarify the estimation's scope. And this means make sure you know what you're trying to estimate. And the first thing I want you to learn here is ask any scope related questions you may have. So there are two main examples that come to my mind in scope related questions. And that is one, potential market. So it's not uncommon that the interviewer is going to ask you to estimate the potential market for something. And if you're not sure what that means, I can explain it to you now. Like, it would mean the total market that could exist for that. So people that could consume, would consume if you do the right thing to have them consume or something like that. But always ask what that means if you're not sure. And the second example here is even more important. And that is, sometimes candidates will estimate the market size of something not in the way the interviewer expects. So usually market size is a metric that's in dollars per year in total revenues. Some candidates will estimate that in number of customers, and they won't ask anything to the interviewer. They'll just come up with their structure, come up with their number, and say that their answer is 10 million customers or something. And that doesn't make any sense, because that's not what the interviewer is expecting. Sometimes the interviewer wants the market size in units, which might make it a lot easier to you, but you won't ask, and then you just go and do it in dollars, and you've just lost time. You've proved that you're a consultant that will lose time instead of asking what you're supposed to do. So if you're not sure what it is that you're trying to estimate, or what metric it is, or how you, or anything like that, then just ask rather than start doing it. And next, beware of gray areas in your scope. So to give you an example of this, in this drill, I asked about the market size, if I'm trying to estimate market size of only bubblegum as in candy or as in other utility chewing gum. And it could be that other utility chewing gum are a possibility for this client and to enter and to grow, and so they might want me to estimate that too. Another example would be TVs. If I'm trying to estimate the TV market size, it's quite common for people to go and estimate how many TVs there are in households, what's the replacement rate of those TVs, and based on that get to the market size of TVs. But if you don't ask, it could be that TVs sold to businesses are very important to this manufacturer specifically, that's your client, or to the market in general, or maybe they just don't want to leave that out. So you have to ask them if they want to know only if you can do only TVs sold to consumers, or are the TVs sold to businesses important too. So like there are TVs, you'll go into fast food chains and there are several TVs showing what the menu is or things like that. So those TVs could be important. At least you have to show the interviewer that you're worried about what is actually the scope of the problem, so that you can do it correctly and that everyone will be satisfied. That's an important characteristic of a consultant. Okay, now next, structure the problem. And this means, as I said, show your plan to get to your answer from beginning to end. So the interviewer has to analyze a bunch of things while they're interviewing you. Will you discuss a certain issue with enough details? Will you miss some of the important issues? Will you get to the final answer? Will you make some math mistakes? And that's confusing. It's a lot of work to evaluate all that at the same time in a candidate. So that makes the interviewer never 100% sure you did everything right if everything's mixed up together. So this brings me to my first point here. Have your interviewer understand the full logic of what you're going to do before you start estimating. So show your full plan, your full structure first. and you're allowing them to look at two of all those things that they have to analyze, and that is if you're going to miss some important variable and if you're going to get to the final answer, and then they can get that out of the way of their mind, and then they can evaluate you properly in everything else that they want to evaluate. And that way the interviewer can be 100% certain that you're a great candidate by the end of the interview, and then they can advocate even harder for you. You want to help the interviewer evaluate you. You two are in the same team here, which is getting a good consultant into his firm. You want to help him with that. Okay? And next, use top-down structures to make sure that you're not leaving anything out and that the interviewer understands your ideas easily. So, best way to communicate an estimation structure is a top-down algebraic tree structure. If that doesn't come easily to you at first, it definitely pays off to spend some time practicing this. If you're having a hard time, it always helps trying to do different structures for the same estimation to test out your ideas. So you can take one specific variable and then break it down in 3 or 4 different ways, and then choose whatever you find best there. And then you take those 2 variables or 3 that you've broken it down into and try to break them down into several different ways too again. And then eventually you'll get the experience so that the tree structures will come easily to you. Let me show you my structure again to make sure we're both on the same page on what's an algebraic top-down tree structure. So what I showed you here is I have bubblegum market in the US in dollars per year, and I'm gonna break it down into a formula, into a product of 2 different variables, which are number of pieces sold and price per piece. Number of pieces sold per year times dollars per piece, that gives me dollars per year. And then I broke down pieces sold into number of consumers times average yearly consumption per consumer. So I have people and bubblegum per person per year, and those 2 together, bubblegum per year. Okay? Now, what I want you to see here is this is a top-down structure because it starts from the final result and it only in the end gets to the actual assumptions or the variables that I need values for. Number 2, this structure is algebraic. Not only, actually, this structure is algebraic. This means that every single breakdown is a math operation, algebra operation, and that's what you want to do, because if you do that, you're making sure that you're always messy. And third thing that I want you to see here, this is only a structure. There are no numbers here at all. I could have broken down average yearly consumption into average weekly consumption times number of weeks in a year. That would be okay. And I could and could not put 50 or 52 as weeks in a year. That's not what matters. I just don't want you starting to discuss assumptions before you've shown the interviewer your full tree, your full structure. Okay? Now let's move on to another step that I want you to see here, and that is explicitly state the algebra in your structure. So especially when that's not obvious, I need you to actually say to the interviewer, I'm going to multiply this by this, I'm going to divide this by that. So in this case, they're all obvious. But one example of something that's not exactly obvious and you might want to explicit to the interviewer, instead of just saying one and the other, you want to say what you're going to do. So imagine you're doing a case where you're trying to estimate how many shoes one specific person buys per year, and you're going to use the replacement rate of formal shoes to determine how many formal shoes they're going to buy. So they have 3 formal shoes in their wardrobe, and you want to know how frequently they're replaced, and that's how many shoes they'll buy per year. So you could say, I'm going to find the replacement rate of formal shoes as a function of the lifetime of the shoe. But another way to say this is, I'm going to find the replacement rate of formal shoes as the reverse of lifetime of formal shoes. So 1 over the lifetime. Now I'm saying what I'm going to do with this number, and this is much stronger, and this makes it clear to the interviewer what I need. Okay? Now let's move on to the next step. Choose your assumptions. So now you've got a clear scope, you've got your structure with everything that you're going to do. You only need to plug in values in the ends of your tree structure, calculate and get your answer. Let's talk about plugging in those values. The first thing that you need to know here is you have to use data and logic to back up your assumptions. So you don't have to overcomplicate, but you do have to use logic to turn a number that you trust into something that you can use. So let me show you an example of this. So I said I chew around 5 pieces of gum per day, but I'd say I'm way above average. So I would assume that high frequency consumers consume around 20 pieces per week. Low frequency consumers consume around 4 to 5 pieces per week. So given that low frequency consumers are more frequent, I would say that the average consumes around 8 to 10 pieces per week. Times 50 weeks per year, that will give me around something like 400 pieces per year for the average consumer. So I use data, and that is how much gum I chew, how much gum I think other people chew based on that. That's not the most trustworthy piece of data, but it's still data. And I use logic, so some people chew more, some people chew less. They have a different distribution. There are more people in one category than on the other. This is how I'm going to calculate them. And then I got to a value. That is not the most trustworthy value, but it's more trustworthy than if I had just said, I don't know, maybe 500, maybe 1,000, whatever. This makes this much stronger, and it shows that I have a skill for building actual quantitative models. Actually, I really built a quantitative model here. So I showed the interviewer that if I happen to know these numbers, maybe because someone told me, maybe because I did my research, or maybe because for some reason I happen to know one of them, then I already have a model. I'll just plug in, actually high frequency consumers are 20% of total consumers, and they consume 30 to 40 pieces per week. And low frequency consumers actually chew 10 pieces per week, and they're 80%. So, and well, the math, what I'm going to do is already clear here. And the interviewer knows that if I happen to stumble upon these numbers, I would have not only a trustworthy number, a really, really useful number here that could be used in a project. Okay? Next, focus on what matters. So you want to show the interviewer that you're going to spend your time as a consultant doing the most relevant work to the client. And spending time only in the most relevant assumptions will show that to the interviewer. So if one assumption won't change much its value or doesn't change much the final result, you don't want to spend several minutes in it. And that would mean several days in a real project. You don't want to do that. You want to go as quickly as you can through it. Let me show you how I did this in this case. So I said that penetration rate of bubblegum probably around 80%, because not that many people chew gum, and even though teens and children chew more, not that many adults don't chew gum. And 80% might even be pessimistic, but the reality is it could be 90, it could be 70. It wouldn't be feasible to be like under 50. So I'm not going to spend so much time in here. 80% is fine. Versus price, for example. I don't know much about the price of gum, and like at least out of the top of my head. And given that I'm doing this per piece, I know even less, because I'm used to buying packages of gum. So I could, if I were not paying attention, trust the price to be 1 cent or 50 cents versus 10 cents a piece if I did not think a little about it. And there are many different types of gum, positioning, amount in a box, etc. So that could be confusing. And the same is true for quantity a year. It's not obvious at all. Like I can think how much gum I eat per day. I even can think how much gum I chew per week. But per year, that's not intuitive at all. So I want to spend more time in those assumptions, because I won't just look at them and say this is off. If I were to look at penetration rate of bubblegum and it's at 5 or 10%, I would definitely say this is off, something's wrong. Okay? Next thing I want you to learn here is you can get creative with your numbers. Here, you can watch my answer again for this. I did compound average, I did segmentations, I made up ratios based on my experience, and you can do anything as long as you're backing up your assumptions with data and you're following some logic. And you're going to see many examples of drills, many examples of this in other drills. And to be honest, the only way to get good at this is practicing. If you're having a hard time, try and do many estimations, try and come up with several ways to do the same assumption, and eventually you'll get proficient in this. It's not that hard, and it's honestly kind of fun. So go ahead and do it several times if you're having a hard time. And last, it's okay to ask. You can ask for the interviewer for some of the numbers. I didn't ask in this case, and I'm not going to ask in any of the drills, because of course I don't have an interviewer in front of me, but you can always ask, and maybe they'll know something. Maybe they won't, but that won't hurt. Of course, if they're saying no to everything, if you're asking every single assumption, do you have this number, do you have this number, and they say they don't have any data, get the hint and find your own assumptions. But for things like the population of a city that you're not used to, or of a country that you don't know very well, you can ask, that's fine. If they need you to come up with your own values, then you're of course gonna have to find a city that's similar to that you think is similar to that, a country that you think is similar in size or in population, and just use that value if they say that's fine. Next, calculate. I don't want to spend too much time on this because, well, the goal of this video is not to turn you into a human calculator, and I'm gonna go over just some principles which, if you're not having specific problems with math and you're not making math mistakes in every single case, they are pretty much everything you need to know right now about calculations so that you can finish estimations comfortably. So the first principle is calculations must be precise and efficient. Precise is more important than efficient, so don't make mistakes, but if you do make them, you have to catch them, and I'll talk about this in a second. And the thing with efficiency is it doesn't mean being able to do 13 times 49 really quickly. It means taking shortcuts. That's what makes a consultant different in their way of making calculations. So it doesn't mean that you don't need to use a paper. It doesn't mean that you're really quick at it. It means that you can take shortcuts. So instead of doing 13 times 49 in your mind really quickly, you can go 13 times 50 is 650. So I'm just going to subtract now 2% of that, and that's going to give me what 13 times 49 is. Okay? And so let me show you how these two showed in this drill. And in this in the second calculation that I did here, I could instantly see that 4 times 256 is 1024, because that's 2 to the 10th. And that gave me a really large shortcut, because I didn't need to do any math on paper or in my mind. I could just easily get to 102 billion. And in the next calculation, what I did was, instead of doing 9 cents times 102 billion, I got 10% of 102 billion, which is 10.2 billion. And then instead of taking 10%, exactly 10% out, I took out 10% of 10 billion, and that brought me to 9.2. Now, this is not correct. It should be 9.18 billion, but I didn't want to lose time for those 0.02 billion, which were not going to be so relevant in my answer. We're not going to be relevant at all. So I just did it. So I was still precise, but most important, I was efficient without giving up relevant precision, because this is not really going to change whether this market is correct or not, because I'm not that sure of any of my assumptions in order to spend so much time on that little part of the problem. Okay? The next thing I want you to learn in calculations is always reality check before you start calculating. So what does that mean? That means doing a ballpark calculation of your math before you actually do the math if you need to, that's always going to show you if you're wrong. And the interviewer is never ever going to catch one of your math mistakes. You're always going to make math mistakes. It doesn't matter if you're an economics PhD, a physics PhD, it really doesn't matter. You are going to make mistakes. You want to catch those mistakes before the interviewer. The way you do that, reality checking. Let me show you how I did this in this case. Those are simple calculations. You probably wouldn't need them so much, but it's still important to do to get the habit, and you're really going to need to do those in the drills that you're going to see next. Now, here in the first calculation, instead of just doing 320 million times 80%, I first said this should be close to 320 million because 80% is close to 100%. And then in the next calculation, instead of just going for my what was in my mind, which was 4 times 256 is 1024, then I just have to deal with the zeros. First I said 4 times 250 is 1000, so that should be 100 billion, and only then I did something, and then I got to 102 billion, and I was like, okay, this is close. I could have messed up in this math because there are a bunch of zeros and gotten to 10.2 billion or 1.02 trillion, and I wouldn't have known if I didn't do this reality check before. Okay, next step, check your answer. This last step is what will set you apart from 95% of candidates. You want to check if your answer makes sense, and consultants do that all the time because you can't really audit complex models quickly all the time. So you just see if the final result makes sense, whether you're checking a teammate's model or your own model. You want to see if it makes sense, if the result makes sense, just see if the model is working properly. And showing the interviewer that you already have this skill in you will put you ahead of all those candidates. I say it will put you ahead of 95% of candidates because most people don't even know that they should be doing this, and several people who know are not doing this right. So let me show you how to do this, and this will be a great leap in your performance. The first lesson I want you to learn here is compare your value to something to get an idea of whether it makes sense or not. The only way to make sense of a number, either to know if it's right or wrong or if it's high or low, is to compare it with some other number. So take blood pressure. If I tell you my blood pressure is 120 over 80, how will you know if that makes sense or not? What if I tell you it's 520 over 120? You can only know it if you know the blood pressure of a normal, healthy adult. And if you're a doctor or if you've been in touch with that before, then you will know it. If you don't, you have to ask someone, you have to do some research, you have to find something to make sense out of those numbers. The same goes for potential market for a new product or expected sales in a new drugstore. Let's talk about potential market for a second. Let's say you're trying to estimate the potential market for high protein potato chips. So instead of a protein shake, you'd eat potato chips. That's the new product that I just came up with. And you came up with a potential market of $500 billion in the US, of course. I only know that that's too much because I'm implicitly comparing it to something. So I could be implicitly comparing it to GDP figures or to other markets, like the total whey protein market is 30 billion. Or to companies' revenues, like Amazon's revenues is 100 billion. Or I could be look at this number and say, well, 500 billion, that means that each American will spend $1,500 on high protein potato chips per year. So all of those are comparisons, and I would not be able to say that 500 billion is too much or too little if I were not comparing it with something. And you see how I manipulated these numbers, how I changed them to do my reality checks, to make sense of them. You can do that. You can do whatever you want to the number as long as you're coming up with the logic to test whether this number makes sense or not. You want to come up with other numbers that you can compare this with, or whatever consequence or component of this number to, so that you can get to an idea of whether it's too high or too low, or not too high or not too low. Let me show you how I did this in this case, and then you get a better sense of what I'm talking about. So, no, you can get creative with your number. So, when I said each American spends around $30 per year on bubblegum, that's between 1 and 3 meals. And I probably spend around the equivalent to 5 meals in gum per year, so that sounds reasonable. What's this saying? This is saying I'm comparing the American expenditure per year, what everyone's spending on bubblegum, to the price of meals, so that I can compare that to my expenditure in bubblegum. So I'm comparing it to something. I'm comparing it to my expenditure in bubblegum. I put meals in the middle of those because I don't spend in dollars, I spend in Brazilian reais. So I want to compare it to something comparable, and I used food for that. When I was doing this case, I actually made a math mistake. I missed a zero, and I caught this doing this reality check. I got to $920 million, and I got to $3 per American. And that didn't make any sense at all. And so I started looking in my model to see if I had gotten any assumption really, really wrong, or if I did a math mistake. And in the end, I made a math mistake. Okay? So the next lesson here is, if you can't find a way, say what you would like to do. So sometimes you won't be able to find a number. Sometimes you're going to be dealing with something way off, way far away from your reality. That's not going to be quite that common in real case interviews, but it is going to be common when you're practicing, because you're going to get, if you're from a country in Europe, you might get exercises from Brazil or the United States, or from China, and all vice versa. And that should be the last resource ever. If you can do anything as a reality check, that's better than doing what I'm going to show you, which is say what you'd like to do. But if you can't find a number, that's a resource better than saying nothing about it. And you're also going to practice so that this never happens, but it might. So you still want to show this ability to the interviewer, even if you don't have a number to do something with. So you want him to know that you're going to be a consultant who actively checks their numbers to see if everything's going as expected with your model, with your numbers, with your slides, in the project that you're following, or anything like that. And let me give you some examples of how this could have happened in this case, and that's going to help you understand what I'm talking about. So here, let's suppose that I couldn't compare this to how much gum I eat per year for whatever reason, or the interviewer said, well, I don't trust that you spend that much in gum, or that you know how much people spend in gum. What would you compare it to? So I could compare this value to the gummy bear market in the United States, to the bubblegum market in Canada. Of course, I need to do some malabarism with those numbers. I need to change them a bit. So if I were to do the gummy bear market in the USA, okay, I could compare it straight away. Or maybe I could think that people spend a little bit less with gummy bears than with bubblegum, and also less people consume that. If I were to compare this with the bubblegum market in Canada, I'd have to change this a little, because populations are very different. The size of population is different. If I were to compare this to the bubblegum market in the UK, I'd have to weigh this based on population. I could compare this to the GDP for candy in the USA, and this would only help me make sure that this isn't too large, but it could also help me a bit to know that this isn't too little. I could compare my value for the average American consumption of bubblegum, which is the variable that's most likely to be wrong. I could compare this to Mars revenues, the candy company. I could compare it to any of those values, and I would say to the interviewer something like, well, I really can't find something to benchmark this with, but I'd like to check if it really makes sense. Do you have any of those numbers? And I would say some of those, and if they say no, I'd say, well, I'm not sure, it looks okay to me, but if I had some time, I would find any of these to compare with my number and get an idea of whether it's way off the ballpark or not. Now, the next lesson is, if you have to adjust your value, go for variables that can change more. So it's quite common for interviewers to end the interview, the estimation question, by saying, all right, well, let's say that your number is 2 times off. Then they'll say something that's twice as much as the value you said, or half the value you said, or 5 times, or anything like that. And they're going to say, well, that's wrong, this is the real value, what do you think happened? When that happens, you go straight for the variables that have 2 conditions. 1, high chances of being wrong, and 2, could be different by a lot. I already told you which one of those were important for me. Here I said, if there's anything way off, it has to be in price or in average consumption. I've explained you why, because if I were a bit naive, I could believe that bubblegum were priced in 1 cent a piece or even 50 cents a piece, and that would sound a little bit off, but not that much off. And I could believe that the average American consumer would consume 1,000 pieces of gum in a year, or even 40. I just have to be a little bit naive for that. But those can change much, much more than, of course, the American population, but also then the penetration of bubblegum. Like, if it were to change much and still sound off to me, it would go down to 50% or up to 100, and it would change, if it were down to 50%, 30% my result. It would not get close to changing 2x or even 5x. And if it were to change up, it would also change in like 50%. So wouldn't really make a difference. So if you have to adjust your value, go straight for the variables that can change more. All right? Also, when I was doing this drill, I was proactive with this. While I was answering, I said, if there's anything way off, it has got to be in price or average consumption, because this and this and that. You don't have to be proactive like that. Of course, it's good, but it won't change so much. So if the interviewer asks you what could be wrong, then you definitely have to point it out, and you have to point it out this way. You go for the variables that have more chance of being wrong and that can change more in a reasonable span of value. Okay? And next, you don't need to wait for the interviewer to ask you this. You can to ask you the reality check question, to ask you, so do you think this is correct? You can be proactive, and you can, after you finish your answer, say, okay, I got to 9.2 billion. Let me just check if this makes sense. And then you do whatever you want as a reality check. And last, don't just check your math. Please, please, please don't just check your math. This is very, very common. When the interviewer asks candidates, what do you think of this number? And they don't know that they're supposed to do reality checks. Their instinct is to check their math and say, yeah, my math is all right. I trust my assumptions. So yeah, this is correct. And sometimes people think that that's what the interviewer means. That's what the interviewer wants them to do. And sometimes they just want to show some confidence. And it happened all the time when I was coaching candidates before they knew that they had to do reality checks. That's not what the interviewer is looking for. They're looking for seeing you use your creativity to check if a given number makes sense, and to see if you're able to do that, because as I said, you're going to be doing that every day as a consultant, and you want to show your interviewer that you're going to be able to do this in the day-to-day. So in that moment, what they want to see is a reality check. Okay? So this was our 5-step approach to estimation questions, and with this and some practice, you're going to be able to ace any estimation case you get. I hope this helped you, and I'll see you in the next video.